Thank you, everyone, for coming to another episode of Silver Lining for Learning. We've been going on for this is our 22nd episode. It's amazing how we've been keeping pushing this. And today we're extremely honored to have Stephen Heppell, Professor Stephen Heppell, with us from the UK or Spain, wherever you might be, but I know you're in the UK right now. And of course, many of you might have, know Stephen's work. He's been doing this for a long time. He's understanding the future. He's a visionary. He's seen a lot of things. I've had interaction with him, for a long time. I think our first time was in Ireland somewhere. That's a long time ago. You may not even remember. And we're reviewing a school. And also our co-host today is me, Yung Zhao, from University of Kansas and Melbourne Graduate School of Education. We also have Punya Mishra from Arizona State University, and Kurt Bunk from Indiana University. We have Chris Stidi in the Hyde and trying to chat with people. We have Scott McLeod in the Hyde as well, and so is Shuang Ye Chen also in Hyde. And so Stephen, let me ask you a question first to say, you've been doing this for a long time. COVID is new. COVID is new in our lifetime, at least, not since 1918, not 1917, as someone else said, So this is, so in terms of the changes, the pushes you've been seeing, you've been trying, you've been articulating, where do you see it's going right now?
Well, we could spend 4 or 5 hours on that alone, really, but let's let's do the, and good evening, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. It's nighttime here. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the education has made some big leaps forward. It's always been on the back of, major socioeconomic change of some sort. Here in England, it was the Industrial Revolution. They suddenly realized they wanted people who could tell the time and do what they were told, So we had a compulsory primary education was brought in. And they kind of pushed community education out of the way, and people were learning before the Industrial Revolution. We had mechanics institutes, and, the guilds of skilled guilds and craft guilds. And then, of course, Second World War came along, and, people in my parents' generation were evacuated from their homes. I mean, people talk about lockdown being a big thing for 2 months. I mean, they were sent off to other parts of the country for 3 years, away from their schools and their parents, and and ended up in some pretty torrid circumstances, really. And after that, the sense of injustice between those who had good quality learning and those who were a long way off the page was really stark. Because some of those inner city kids, went off to live in the country, and people were amazed they couldn't even, add up a bag of beans, So that was when we got proper secondary education, 1944 Education Act, and COVID feels to me like it's big enough. It's big enough to be the next step. It doesn't mean it will be. I've been a professor for 32 years. So old I've lost count, but
me too.
Yeah, but you said saying that. But I've never been wrong in all that time, and I say that with incredibly modesty. But I never get the time right, so I always know what's going to happen. But sometimes you think, I like mobile phones. Everybody's going to have them. In the classroom. The first mobile phone we put in the classroom, the kid said, "This is great. I can phone up France and practice my French." And I barely know a classroom now where people pick up a mobile phone and phone another language to practice it. Well, 30 years on or whatever, So, but I think maybe this is the moment when the time jumps ahead. And it's a really interesting time to sort of zero some of our assumptions about learning and see where that might take us. You know, there are clearly things that are imperfect, and you know that's articulated well enough by lots of people who, you know, make a career out of saying what's wrong with education. I happen to like teachers and I like kids a lot, you know, and I talk for long enough that, you know, recognize that teaching's a craft. You know, it's been a very calm day today, but if it's a windy day, the kids behave differently when it's not a windy day, and every teacher will tell you that. Quite a lot of parents will tell you that. So there's a lot of craft in the profession, but also now, you know, there's a lot of technology and a lot of opportunities. And one of the things I think we've seen really strongly in the COVID debacle, really, because I think none of our countries have done a very good job on it. They're all in sort of denial, which I'll come back to maybe in a minute. But one of the things that happened was a few schools said, right, take the timetable, put it online. If it's 11 o'clock, sit down, turn on the Zoom, and it's RE with Mr. Smith, you know. And of course, that didn't have a hope of working because, firstly, Mr. Smith was pretty boring online. Let's be honest. You know? But much more to the point, you know, the home was already running his own timetable. He got 2 or 3 siblings. You know, mum's trying to hold down a 0 hours contract, so, you know, she's online trying to find work, or, you know, if there are 2 parents, not always these days, but if there's another parent, you know, the other one's fighting for bandwidth and hardware. So, you know, if the school insists that the home falls in line with the school's timetable, immediately, you know, 40% of kids just fall out of the thing. If, on the other hand, as we know from the huge number of schools who went, that's not going to work, let's try something else. And they started thinking about longer blocks of time, project-based work, collaborative engagement, kids learning around the world, which was a hard thing to do when you had to go there on a bus, but it's a really easy thing to do when you do it this way, you know. And suddenly we realized that if the school could fall in and be agile enough to fit in with the households, then you had equity and you had inclusion. But actually, you had the kids doing really well as well. And the thing that's characterized most of my life really as a prof has been that constant amazement at how good the kids can be. You know, I think I was doing a chat actually just a few days back, and one of them said, you know, don't you ever get scared at night? You try these amazing programs, and some of our projects, you know, biggest internet learning project in the world and Guinness Book of Records, you know. And they said, don't you get scared of these things? And I said, yeah, I do, but the projects where I wake up in the middle of the night and say, oh, Stephen, you know, what have you done now, mate? You really shouldn't have done that. What were you thinking? Those are the ones that are just about ambitious enough to keep up with kids. And over here, we're in the middle of a lovely COVID meets bureaucracy illustration of all that. Our secondary school kids weren't able to do their exams because actually putting them all in a room, shutting the door, and gassing them with their own CO2 was already a bad idea. throw in a few viruses, and it's a fatal idea. So they couldn't do their exams, and we've just had our government in their simple way. They're simple folk, you know. They've we will apply an algorithm to the examinations, you know. And their algorithm, of course, you know, marked everybody down and has caused complete mayhem. You know, we've got a whole generation of kids who missed their university places and to be serious, you know, are in many cases suicidal at this point. But it's interesting because every teacher will tell you that the examinations mark the kids down. Every teacher will tell you of the kid whose grandfather had died, whose dog had run away, who was having a bit of a menstrual moment, who had hay fever or whatever, you know, and did badly on the day. So teachers' assessments always say, that's how good my kids are. And for some of them, the exam comes in lower. Now, our government have decided that what's important is the low grade rather than how good the kids are. So when the teacher says, hey, this is how good my kids are, they say, well, we don't trust teachers, you know. So it's a really nice illustration, really, the way the system doesn't believe how good the kids can be. And what we've seen with COVID is depth. Look, you can see up behind me here is a space rocket hanging from the ceiling here and over the pinball machine. And you know, I live with a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. My granddaughters live with me. It's a lovely thing when you're a granddad. And they, you know, the 6-year-old is obsessed by space. And I guess in the curriculum, she would have learned the order of the planets and maybe a little debate about whether Pluto was there or not, you know. But she knows in depth more about Saturn than I do. She tells me stuff. And she's completely obsessed with it, you know, which is lovely. Now, in the traditional curriculum, it would have been in horizontal layers, and you can't do that till next year. And I'm not supposed to tell you this, so, you know, don't tell anybody. I've told you early. You know. And what she did is just, I like space, tell me everything, you know. And off she went. And, you know, you can see that horizontal limiting of children.
I'm going to cut in, Stephen, with that point, because it seems to me you and I think all of us in agreement, children are more powerful really than most of us, not us, the traditional system control them. You know, one of the things that really controls our kids or really limits them is the traditional curriculum, the traditional assessment. Do you see any examples of people moving away from the traditional curriculum, traditional assessment?
Oh, golly, yes. And if I look a bit jaded, it's because in the last month, I've talked to 103 ministers of education. That's some sort of record, I think. I feel there should be some sort of medal for that, you know. And you know what? 4 out of 10 of them are saying we're done with standardized testing. You know, we're done with the limited curriculum. We're done with a model where the kids can't go as fast as they need to go. And the two things really that have propelled them in that direction. I mean, one is just seeing how good the kids can be at home. And I mean, you know, there's an equity issue. There are some kids that had an appalling time, but there are plenty of kids who've just, I mean, I was looking at a post the other day from somebody who said, my kid hasn't done any of the schoolwork, been set for her, you know, she's done nothing. On the other hand, she's replumbed the bathroom and she's round helping the neighbours with their plumbing, and she's, you know, 13-year-old kid with a blowtorch. She's doing amazing stuff, you know. So people have seen that. But also, I think what we've seen from COVID is we need ingenuity. Been a lot of talk, hasn't there, about knowledge and creativity, and then kind of you need to put the two together. And I think, you know, if I was to, you know, if I was to put a tissue on my head, you know, arguably that's creative, but I'm not sure it's very useful. But ingenuity is about solving a problem and having enough knowledge. So look, I'll give you a trivial example of something I've been playing with. This is entirely, don't try this at home, you know. But I've been doing a bit of work in Saudi Arabia, which is a fun place to work. That's the most lovely kids and teachers and families. And I've been looking at the you know, the traditional, you know, Saudi headdress and thinking, well, maybe if we rigged up a proximity sensor on the headdress, you know, I could kind of work out when I've got a bit near to somebody with the old COVID thing, and maybe gamify the whole business of avoiding other people. It's interesting because I had to check with the clerics about whether, you know, because I like Islamic culture, they've got some good ideas. One of them being you shouldn't try and draw attention to yourself. You see the contrast here between Kurt's shirt and mine. You can see where I've been lately, you know. But I was a bit worried that having lights flashing around your head, you know, was drawing attention to yourself, you know, was there for anti-Islamic. But actually, because it's a sensor, you're drawing attention to somebody else's proximity, so it's all right. You know? I find the whole clerical protocols a fascinating place, you know. But that's ingenuity, and I think what we need is ingenious kids, because we've got, I mean, crikey, COVID-19, the clues in the 19, you know, there'll be more, and that's before, I mean, global crisis looks like the catastrophe of our lifetimes, really, and who knows what else is coming along, you know, week on week, month on month. So we need ingenious kids. And if I think back, interestingly, to the Second World War example I was giving, all those kids that were sent off away from home to live on farms and not be with their parents, and you know, they had to learn to cope with the unexpected. They had to learn to apply their knowledge in a way that they hadn't expected to do. They had to learn to do unexpected things. And as I always say, when you give kids unexpected things to do, they always astonish you right back with how well they do them. Because that was a golden generation in Great Britain that were, you know, the golden generation of engineering invention, of electronic invention. They were just an extraordinary generation, very much as I think your generation was too. Now we put the children and grandchildren of those people into schools, and the poor old teacher sitting outside the exam room saying, I hope there's no surprises on the exam paper. Well, that's the very opposite of what should be on the exam paper. The damn thing should be full of surprises. You know, oh, look, I wasn't expecting this, you know.
Well,
and of course, the first thing you should do when you find that is turn to your neighbor and say, what are we going to do about this? Because sure as heck, we're in a collaborative world. And one of the last, I don't want to labor the point, but one of the last big things we've seen from COVID is how well kids have managed to work with this sort of environment. You know, I love it when they do the banana thing, where they all turn up at the banana and one of them picks up the banana and passes it on. Oh, thank you very much. And the banana comes in from the other screen, and you know, the banana goes all around the room. Of course, they're different bananas, you know, but it's just wonderfully playful, you know. Or I was in one the other day, and I'm chatting to I've been doing a lot of these for policymakers, of talking to children about what will they miss when they go back from lockdown, and you know, what have they missed in school, and what have they missed from the home experience, you know. And I'm chatting to this girl, and suddenly she appears in her own conference call with a cup of coffee, gives herself a cup of coffee, and goes out of the room. I thought that's pretty cool, you know, because she'd recorded a video from her camera of her coming in the room and dropping a coffee, and she'd run the video as a background environment. So, you know, 10 minutes into the call, she arrives and gives herself a coffee. You know, this is ingenuity. This is the stuff we want, you know. So, and it's collaborative, and I think that's been lacking really in the control systems we built around our children. And so, you know, I think collaboration has been a big thing.
What Stephen, you're talking about collaboration, the new possibilities, exploring uncertainty, the unknown. I think you're touching right upon something that is getting rid of the curriculum, try to think of something new. I'm glad you talked to the ministers that we need to do that. I know, Punya, you have a question. Punya, you want to ask?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple of thoughts. So one, I loved the Second World War analogy that you gave, and how the children had to sort of, you know, cope with that. And that ended up being, because I'm thinking of sort of not just in engineering and science, I'm thinking of literature and film and all of those aspects that had this wonderful outpouring when that generation got to be around 20, 25 years old. So I think that's an aspect of silver lining that we really haven't talked about in some ways, that we've always seen that, oh, these children are being denied X, Y, and Z, but maybe in some ways this crisis is also molding them in some ways to be more ingenious, to understand that surprises come along and that we have to figure things out. But the other point I wanted to make,
just a word of caution there. I mean, don't say that too loud, or you know, politicians say, hey, what we need is another war, you know, off they go.
right.
I think COVID will do. COVID will do.
COVID will do. But I think the larger point is that of the resilience, and how that can be a fount for creativity and ingenuity. So I think but I want to come back to something you had said in the beginning, which was around how schools, if they wanted to just maintain the same schedule, didn't work. But once you started seeing it in terms of how can the school and home work together, I think there's so much potential in that space, because when we say something is public education, what we have created are these spaces where we say learning can happen only here and nowhere else. And whenever somebody comes in, we seek to flatten them. We flatten them either by age or by, I grew up in India, which means school uniform. You ignore the cultural richness that you come in with. So you would be taught in a language, or would have no respect for your native language or native culture and background. And it seems that there is a great opportunity here to actually truly make public education sort of part of both the local and the global community in
Yeah,
ways that were not possible before. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, that's such a wise thing to say. So let's unpack that a little, because there's quite a lot there. I mean, so firstly, I think global economies of scale, locally delivered, is a good feeling. I think one of the things we haven't managed to do with technology and education is make it cheaper, which seems pretty bizarre. I think our computers are cheaper, our televisions are cheaper, our transport's cheaper. My cheap old shirt is cheaper. Probably was made in India. And schools haven't been, and I think that's had a profound effect on countries who've been trying to copy Western education and have found it out of reach. 25 million kids in Pakistan with no school, no teachers. I've been down in Yemen as part of the Saudi work. It's pretty desperate down there. And even if you went down and built loads of schools, if you had, I don't know, Elon Musk's money, you kind of rush down there and build 1,000 schools, you're not going to find 20,000 teachers to put in them. So, I think we need to think again about how we can do this cheaper. And it's right in front of us, because kids don't need to be at school every day. And one of the things that the kids have been saying to me post-COVID has frightened the life out of their policymakers, because the question is, in a blended world where you're doing some online learning and some face-to-face, and face-to-face, you need those touch points sometimes, but online you get to work with other people, you get to work collaboratively, you get to review the things you didn't quite understand and do them again, and you have no limits on your learning. So the kids want to do some of that too. The kids I'm talking to are saying, well, 2 days a week would be enough at school. I don't need more than that. And, a pretty large number of them are saying 1 day a week. So that opens up some really interesting thoughts, because here in Europe, I think with something like half our workforce are working from home right now. And remember, that isn't just service industry stuff. It isn't just people doing management meetings in Zoom. There are people doing home manufacturing, because, hey, we've got 3D printers and all sorts of things running, so half the country working from home. And suddenly, that model of education of put the children somewhere so the parents can go to work disappears. I mean, in England and in America too, the kids stop for the summer. And the reason they stopped for the summer was to go and get the harvesting. That was why they stopped. We all say, oh my goodness, kids have been out of school for a month and a half. But I mean, every summer we kick them out of school for a month and a half so they can go and pick strawberries. Or that was the history of it. So suddenly, we're in a situation where there's enough parents around to look after the children. I don't for a minute mean they should be teachers, but they're just there to stop the kids getting their heads stuck in the toilet or whatever, and suddenly the model starts to look very different. But that's interesting, because you look how crowded some of your schools, I mean, frighteningly so, I think, in a post-COVID world, because you want to spread your kids out a bit. Well, one great way to spread your kids out a bit is have them only come 2 days a week. And then suddenly, everything becomes possible. You've got and also it's really interesting, because getting teachers to fit their lives in with the school is tough. A large number of our teachers are also parents, and it's quite hard to be a mum or a dad and look after kids and look after 30 or 50 kids or whatever at school. But actually, giving 2.5 days of your week and doing it from home makes it all very viable. So another big shock, and I had a big meeting with a whole group of teachers last week, funnily enough, and they were teachers who used to teach but had given it up. And I was saying, hey, look, in this more blended world where you can work from home, you can work doing the fragment of the curriculum that is your passion. You don't want to teach English because you're fed up with fronted adverbials, but you're still passionate about metaphysical poetry, and you'd die for Andrew Marvell, had we but world enough and time. In that world, would you come back? And they were like, yeah, we'll be there tomorrow, So this vast army of people who trained to be teachers who would then build schools that they wouldn't want to be teachers in will come back. And that's really interesting because then all those kids in Pakistan with no teachers, hey, you got teachers all around the world. There's another little example that's worth mentioning. My daughter was one of those people. She was a great teacher in a London school. Some of you will have, Kurt will have seen her speaking at BET, doing some pretty cool stuff. She's out of that now. She lives out here on the coast with us, but she runs the beach school. And the beach school is for kids who are preschool age. They go down onto the beach. Go to beachschool.org. It's all there, but they go down to the beach and they do marine science for preschool kids. And it's been really interesting because they'll tell you the gender of every crab on the beach. They'll tell you the genus of the seaweed. I mean, they know the science of the place. 18 months ago, they discovered a little tiny jellyfish swimming around on the boating lake that should not be there. Contacted some marine biologists, and we had sort of marine biologists arriving with blue flashing lights, because these nasty little critters weren't supposed to be there. Turns out they were coming in the ballast of water tankers nearby. But when the biologists got there, they couldn't find them. And the little 4-year-olds would say, oh, look in the weeds. They like to hide in the weeds. They knew more about the behavior of the little things than the marine biologists. So, when you take kids out of a system that makes assumptions about how fast they can go, they go faster. And interestingly, as we've seen here with the beach school, they infect the whole community. When I walk down to the seafront now, there's lots of parents and grandparents and uncles and aunties doing crabbing, dipping the ball. I caught the crab, But if I listen to what's going on, the little kids all over town are talking about the crabs. They're talking about the marine ecology, and it's swept through the town like a virus. It's just the most wonderful thing. We've all been infected with learning, a little bit ahead of being infected with COVID. So I think we've got a chance here to zero all our assumptions, and let's just take a moment to think about the money one as well, because hey, we're always going to have wealthy schools. That's not so unusual. The world we have Eton, founded by a prostitute for poor children, but it's come up on the rails a bit in the last few centuries. But those wealthy schools, all you get for spending a lot of money is you get a posh version of what everybody else has got. You get a bigger playing field. Probably your PE teacher was in the Olympics. You've got better equipment in your science lab. Basically, it's just a kind of deluxe version of the one down the road. Now, I think if we're going to see change happening, what you need to demand for your money is new. Imagine if every time you bought a car, I'm going to buy a Rolls Royce. They'll say, okay, mate, here's a version of the Edsel, but with leather seats. You don't want last year's car. You want the latest and fastest Tesla. And you pay a premium for it. So I think what happens here is the premium in education goes from better and shinier to newer and first. And that's interesting because the minute you've innovated, the pressure's on for more innovation. We pass the innovation down, and we know with technology, the innovation gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Look, here's a little train set. I've got grandchildren play with these wooden train sets. But you know what? This little train set has this fully functioning Bluetooth. You know, I can control it from the phone. You know, and it was cheaper to buy than the original wooden train set was 20 years ago. You know, so what happens is, you know, you get early, you get the latest tech. You know, I can stick this thing on my head, and this lets me control my computer with brainwaves. You know, that's pretty cool. But it'll be in your hat in 10 years' time, won't it? So, you know, the money thing, what you get for going to Harvard, what you get for going to one of your best secondary schools, you just get there a little bit early. And I mean a little bit early, maybe 2 or 3 years. Now, for the rest of the world, we've got to make sure that the marginal cost of rollout is pretty close to zero. And how do we do that? You know, how do I get 25 million kids into school in Pakistan or wherever without any money? And the answer is, damn, it's looking us in the face. It's the kids. It's the kids. And what we've seen with Beach School, and we've seen, you know, you'll remember, I think some of you, we used to run Not School, which was a notschool.net, go to the website, it was a virtual school for kids who've been expelled, excluded from school. And they did, by the way, they did better as a cohort of the schools that had thrown them out, which always amused me, you know. But what we learned from all these things is kids helping each other accelerate. You know, the young kids chase after the role model of the older kids. Desperate. My 4-year-old is desperate to be my 6-year-old. You know, and the 6-year-old has got to keep her act together, because otherwise the 4-year-old will overtake her, you know. And in keeping her act together, she's got to have a very clear understanding of the concept she's passing on. So, you know, we know that mixed age
You know,
work in
Stephen,
families and orchestras and everywhere. Why wouldn't they work in schools? And kids will do it for free. Kids will do it for free.
Stephen, I know Kurt has a question, but I want to follow up briefly on what you were saying. Just a comment. It's just fabulous what you were saying, because we all believe children today with blended learning, they really can learn, they do learn, they want to learn. You know, of course, used to have families and parents want to keep the establishment going. They said, well, so they still want to, they want to be selected to be the best, not trying to be the best on their own. In essence, you know, if you go to Oxbridge, you have been selected. So you're playing other people's games. And so hopefully you'll be selected. What you are, I think, and I and many of us are talking about, why don't you, the child, and we help you become the best you can be, rather than because of a test. I know Kurt has a question, but go ahead, respond to that. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I have a most wonderful life, you know, and one of the cool things I get to do, I work with elite sports teams, you know, so I work with Olympic teams, I work with British Olympic team, I work with soccer teams, I work with the England rugby team and so on. And one of the things I've learned from them is that marginal gains really do aggregate, and you really do, you know, by looking at every tiny detail, you really do make progress. But also, you know, if I look at some of our Olympic squads, you know, cycling, hockey, whatever, when I see them talking, I can't tell you who's the athlete and who's the coach. They just, I mean, everybody is watching the data, everybody is pattern watching, everybody is looking for ingenious solutions, everybody is sharing. And when they go up to win their gold medals, and I mean, have a look at what happened to the British Olympic team in Atlanta. We won 1 gold medal for rowing. We used to be very good at sitting down sports. Any sport where you sat down, we were top nation. Rowing, cycling, sailing, you know, kayaking, yes, horse riding. If you sat down, we were good. The minute we got up, we were rubbish, you know. And then by the time we get to Rio, I mean, we'd beaten all but every nation, and more gold medals. I couldn't even list the name of the gold medalists. There are so many. But You know, if the hockey team and the hockey girls won gold in Rio first time, when they went up to get a medal, they didn't sort of go along and say, well done, you weren't really trying, well done. Everybody got the medal. And the thing to learn is, how do I work in a team? You know, people talk about leadership, leadership, blah, blah, blah. But there's a hell of a need for fellowship. You know, how do I bite my tongue and do what I've been asked to do, and then chip in with my bit of wisdom later on. You know, and in a team, you know, you might have, you know, in a project team, and you've seen this with project-based learning. I know all of you, but you know, you've got one kid who's just had the most brilliant idea, but he's a lazy so-and-so, you know, and they have two good ideas that absolutely are going to win the competition, and then they just put their feet up and do nothing, you know. And somebody else has just absolutely been diligent, done all the paperwork and got all the stuff. Well, you know that you need all those people in a team. And, you know, if we try and pull them out and make sure they're all good at everything, that's no flipping good at all. It's like having I struggle a bit with American football as an analogy, because how the heck you can call it football when nobody uses their feet is beyond my understanding. But you know, if you
could give a cricket analogy, I would appreciate that one.
Well, of course, you know. So let's take a cricket analogy then. You know, if everybody had to be a really good wicket keeper, you know, some of the best fast bowlers in history would never have got on the team. You know, so you know, there's a point at which you want kids to be really good at being who they are, and to take that forward, and not to try and be fabulous at everything. Now, of course, you know, the point at which you allow that, you know, if you said to a 4-year-old, right, you're never going to be any good at maths, don't do anymore, and that would obviously be inequitable, you know. But you can see that by building those teams and watching them, they work really well. Now, you know, when you look at the rural areas, you've got those teams. You've got particularly grandmothers, and a lot of grandmothers around the world in areas where the kids don't go to school. There's a lot of grandmas, you know, because women had a tough time culturally and didn't have much employment, so they're all kicking around, and they're desperate to want to help, and the kids want to help, and the kids, you know, you can walk up to 3 kids sitting on the ground in Kashmir, and they all want to be astronauts. You know, there's no sense that they haven't got a chance. They're busting full of ambition, and you know what? They're really good at solving the problems that are around them where they are. It's really interesting. You know, if I take them from there and put them in some artificial situation with an artificial problem, and you know, mathematics paper where I've got to be really literate to even understand the questions, they're going to do real bad. But if my question is, okay, you've got 2 terms to do something extraordinary with the crop here, and you know, apply all the science you've got to getting a higher rice yield, you watch them go. And so that, you know, that grounded learning is what our communities have been doing for centuries before we built schools. Now we've got that community learning back on steroids because we've got technology too.
See, that's what I want to go with some
Kurt,
questions.
what are we going to say?
So we haven't introduced Stephen yet, by the way. And Stephen was in the UK, where I met him at Anglia Ruskin University, then in Dublin, I believe, for a while, now in Spain, and back in the UK for the summer so he can take care of his granddaughters. But he's working in Spain. Take a look at his bio, look at his website. You'll be amazed at the projects that he lists in there. And by the way, you know, this is creative when you said that. But the twit races in Monty Python was creative, you know, believe it or not. And the other comment I have, you know, when you mentioned it is the kids, the best episode that we've had of the 22 so far were the kids that we had in here. So just a couple of side points in here, but do take a look. When I met him the last time in January 31st, 2013 at the BETT conference, that's like 40,000 people. The BET conference is a fantastic place, and we were in the theater of the round, like a Shakespearean theater. And if you were bad, if you're awful, people could walk out of the room while you're in the midst of speaking. So that was a really interesting. They have the neon lights going on all around and whatnot. And Stephen kept the audience. He kept them captivated, one thing after another. And the first time when I met you in 2001 in Tampere, Finland, you went through pirate radio, the Ultra Lab. pictures of people as the age from 1 to 91, multimedia museums. It was one idea after another. I was amazed, but it was not school that caught my attention and that I wrote about in my book, The World is Open, about 5 pages devoted to not school, because I linked it to Ivan Illich and deschooling society. And where you're talking about teachers as really mentors, you're talking about students as researchers, undergraduate and graduate students as the governors. You're creating a whole new model. And I'm wondering 2 things here. With not school, is today, in effect, the world is not school. And what principles can we take from your 20 years project that started in 1997, maybe to 2016, that transformed kids' lives? What can we learn from that today to help kids become more self-directed learners, to help teachers be mentors to the students, to help their peers become and others become governors of that learning and embracing and collaboration, all that stuff. So take a look at his website, go to Stephen's talks if you have a chance. You'll be amazed and be just blown away. I mean, it's still vivid in my memory. Your talk was 19 years ago in Temporary Village. I was captivated. And, I turned to my friend, Jim Hensman, and he says, this is cool stuff. He says, you've not heard of Not School? Well, I hadn't heard of Not School. It wasn't big in the United States, So can you comment or elaborate on some of the principles maybe behind
Well, look, I mean, that's
and maybe talk about some other projects that you would like that are relevant today.
okay. Well, I've got a really interesting one, but I'm going to tell you a secret in a minute. So you've got to promise not to tell anybody.
We always want secrets on the show. That's why we're here.
Let's hope there's nobody listening. But before I do, I mean, yeah, my web server took 25 million hits last year, unique users. So there's a lot of people out there looking at that stuff, and they're looking at it all around the world, which is pretty nice. But the secret is, it's all one product, right? All one project, really. And the project is just come and see if we can't mend the world we're learning. And that's it. That's what I'm doing. And all these pieces of it, they're just bits of the jigsaw puzzle. So, it's a good question. What do we learn from Not School? Well, lots. And I'll give you a couple of lovely little anecdotes that, the plural of anecdote is not data, but it's sure as heck is entertaining. So one was that we didn't know what to call the kids. I mean, it was not school. And most of them had a pretty profound experience with schooling had gone wrong. And they'd stabbed somebody, or they'd run away, or something bad had happened. Mostly, by the way, tracked back to a moment of profound humiliation. It was really them that had started the problem. But so in the end, we called them researchers. Tom Smith, one of the guys in the lab, it was his idea. Carol Chapman was running it. She did the work and said, yeah, that's a good term, we'll use it. And one of the early sessions we were doing in the Department of Education for the senior policymakers, and there were some journalists there. And one of the journalists asked the kids, because I always have kids with me, because as you say, they would give the best responses. It wasn't so late now, I'd have had the kids in. But they said to the kids, isn't it a bit funny being called researchers? Why don't you just be students like everybody else? And we just grabbed the kid in time. We thought he was going to deck the journalist, because he said, of course we're researchers. Nobody knows about this stuff. We're inventing this together. This is our project. We're the researchers. Of course we're not students. Who are we going to learn from? I mean, it's just a fantastic, agency moment, really, which was really strong. And the community thing was really strong as well. We had a kid who ran away from home, and home background was pretty terrible. By the way, everybody was given a brand new computer at the start. It was always an iMac. Remember the big jelly iMacs, early iMacs, and we gave them, with one of the reasons we gave them that Apple stuff, because the boxes are so nice. And there's something very special about opening the box, it's a fabulous one. And they kept saying, you mean this is mine? Yeah, it is, I could sell it tomorrow. Well, you could, but then we never lost one. So this kid had run away, and we didn't have a uniform. I mean, as you were saying, uniforms just badge kids up, But we did have a woolly hat that said not school. And this kid just disappeared. And then we had a phone call from somebody who'd been driving down a motorway and had happened to stop in a service station. And there was a kid sitting there looking a bit surly with a hat on that said, not school, and it was a fairly well-known program. So we got this phone call. There's a kid on their own looking a bit dodgy, So we sent George, who was a big bloke, for George to just sort out, get in the car. George goes up the motorway, walks in. And as he walks to the door, this kid looks up and said, I knew you'd find me. That absolute faith, that we were a team, and didn't matter what, they could just be sitting somewhere with a woolly hat on. We were going to find them, that. And I think that sense of membership and community and agency, the kids said such wise things, they said, when you really crap at something at school, they give you more of it. So, how's that going to work?
Exactly.
So, we learned to listen to children and to trust them, and it was powerful. But really, it is all. So, we set up a degree because the kids, having gone through this non-standard way of learning, they're unstoppable. Okay, degree next. Okay, well, you're not going to sit down and lecture theatre with 250 others and make notes at this point, are you? Because you've had complete agency for the last however many years, So we set up a degree, really interesting, where what you did full time was also what you studied full time. So your full-time employment was your full-time study. Doesn't get more grounded than that. And we had people on it from, company receptionists, who, by the way, after 3 years of studying, the sociology of people, she ended up running the outward-facing department of the whole company. I mean, she went from receptionist to on the board, on the basis of her 3-year degree. We had somebody who was a researcher with our Minister of Education, all sorts of people. But they sat there like little Trojan horses in their workplace, sucking in research and wisdom, thinking ingeniously with this wonderful live community of other people with the same challenge, And of course, one of the problems we then found was that they all passed a damn degree. We had huge numbers of kids with first-class honours degrees and far too many. So we had to get in other universities to come and moderate and tell us what we should do. And the other university said, we're going to up the mark because you've been too harsh. There should be even more of them, So no surprise, when you build the learning around the people, the learning's better. You asked about
That's quotable.
Yeah. I mean,
let's put that on the front page of Silver Lining. Can you show us the Learnometer that you have there? What that
I will.
does?
So why do you have this has all come out of the work with sports. That's really interesting because, if I'm a cyclist, I shave my legs. I put my wheels in a wind tunnel. So we came back into the class and thought, I wonder if we looked at all, people talk about standards in school and how good the buildings are and blah, blah, blah. We thought, I wonder how good they really are. So we started building, early on we were 3D printed these things with a little tiny screen on the front. There's a good Chinese story here. Don't tell your man Trump he'll get mad, but we ordered printed circuit boards. We custom designed the printed circuit boards, do it on a computer, easy peasy. We sent the thing off to China and said, we want 50 of these delivered on our doorstep. How much are you going to charge us? And they wrote back and they said, I think it was about £38. And we said, yeah, all right. It's a bit much, but we'll have it. But it turned out the £38 was for all of them. It wasn't each. It was the whole lot. We got 50 for £38 delivered tax paid, So we started looking, and the minute we started looking, it was a horror story, an absolute horror story. Let's take some of the numbers. So they measure, humidity, CO2. CO2 in here is over 1,000. I'm just going to open the window and we'll look at it again in a minute, see it drop. We've got the TVOCs, we're looking at microparticulates, humidity, light, especially light, temperature, all the things where we've got good cognitive research about the impact of those numbers on the way our brains work. And then we turned them on and we went, oh my Lord, look how bad these numbers are. I mean, we found in Dubai, we found kids in classrooms with the CO2 levels are over 7,000 parts per million. And your brain goes walkabout just about around 1,000, you know. Most classrooms in most of the schools we go into, the CO2 goes above a limit where you start impacting on you cognitively about 20 minutes into the day. So you turn up, you register, you say hello to your teacher, and you're pretty much screwed after that, you know. So it's quite alarming, you know. And also CO2 is a heavy gas, so it goes up, but it doesn't. Kids go out of break, it goes down a bit, and then it keeps on going up. It just gathers in the room, you know. We'll come to COVID with this in a minute. It gets really interesting. So we started saying, okay, let's do BYOP. So the kids all bring in their own plant, and you know, never mind the tablet. Bring a blinking plant in, and the plants we're working with NASA on what the best plants are because they're taking plants to Mars, so they know which ones are going to turn the CO2 back into oxygen. And then got really interesting because one of the plants is Aloe Vera, which you'll recognize if you live anywhere with sun, you know, too much sun. And we had a lad in Islington. He wasn't much of an attender, to be honest. You know, things were tough at home, and he came in when he could, you know, and then he usually got into trouble for being late. So, you know, we gave him his plant, and he didn't look very impressed, to be honest. Here you are, here's your plant. Well, thanks, you know. I think he was hoping for an iPad, you know. And I'll maybe come to that in a minute as well. So they have to name their plants. It's very important. It's their plant because then there's husbandry. You know, they do things with their plants. They try different. They try different feeds for them. They try different watering regimes. They build a little Arduino self-watering device, hang it on the side. So there's a whole lot of STEM and STEAM and biology in it. But he called his plant Vera. He said it's an aloe vera. I'll call it Vera. But then this is where the magic starts. He comes into school. He goes, "Hello, Vera," which he thinks is hilarious, you know, because it's the name of the plant and it's the name of the plant, you know. To be honest, it's quite funny. I'm still laughing 2 years on, you know. But now, blow me down, he's in every day because he's got skin in the game. You know, he's got a plant, he's got to look after it, he's got responsibility for it. There's kids getting excited in the class because their spider plants have had babies. There's a whole thing going on there that's really interesting. So it's not just about grabbing the data and giving it to the kids and saying, what are you going to do about it? When we put, I think something like 162, I think one of the fabulous teacher in Dubai, who if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see her. She put plants into 162 classrooms and everything got better. You know, the kids' attention, their engagement, their ADHD went down. Kids who've been on Ritalin for 3 years, there's nothing wrong with them. They were being gassed by their own emissions, basically. It was quite alarming, you know.
It's
so then it
gotta
gets
be
to be
so,
really
so satisfying in terms of your research as a person to know you're making a difference in so many different places for so many different people.
Yeah, no, honestly, it's just the most super thing. One of the best things in my life when I go back to the Caribbean or start building a school in South America. I mean, you know, you go back and they always say, "You'll never guess what's happened to our kids." And I go, "No, I will guess, but tell me anyway," you know, because it's like every time it's a delight, you know. So this thing gets
Stephen,
really.
I think we've got a question coming in from the
You
audience.
know, I don't
Young wants to ask.
I don't know if we actually have time to address that question because that question has to do with how do you know, children have swift and changing interest. Some may not find the love right away. I think that may be addressed differently in a different time. But I'm actually really interested in about really 3 or 4 minutes. And what would you tell schools that are in the process of trying to go back. Every school, I don't know if you read news about America. America's schools are going back, not going back. I think they're debating perhaps the round thing. What would you tell people?
Well, it's it scares me a little, of course, to see some of those crowded corridors that you've got. So, I think what you've got to say to the kids is, it's a science thing. You've got to read the science. You've got to think of your own solutions and think what those solutions might be. And some of that is really unexpected. The plume of aerosol infection from flush toilets goes about 5 meters. So you need to have a lid on every toilet and shut the lid before you flush it. You show kids a little animation of that, and they will never leave a toilet with the lid up again. You shut the lid, flush the toilet, it's safe. Clearly you need to think about outdoor learning, and there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So you've got to think about properly learning outside. Now, people talk about going outside to play. I love playful learning. Cut me and I bleed playfulness. But just going outside is already significantly safer. I'm just to check those numbers on here now. So the CO2, look, we're down to 800 already and falling. So we've taken 400 parts per million off the CO2 just by opening the window by the desk. And when was that? 5 minutes ago? It'll go down to about 450 because that's what it is outside. So when we look up with the learnometers, when we look at the data from outside learning, we find the outdoors is really good for your brain. Just to give you a sense of number. So you're trying to hit lux levels in a classroom of 500 or better. Clear research. And I'm building to about 1,000 lux, which is very bright, very white. And one of the ways we do it is to use, can you see the wall behind me? It seems to be lit, but there's no light there. It's just high refractive paint. So it's picking up light actually in the room from the computer screens. That's what you're seeing reflected back off the wall. But it needs to be pure white light. So you're looking, when you buy the bulbs, you're looking for a Kelvin value of 5,500, 6,000, something like that. When you get that pure white light and you get it up to 1,000 lux indoors, it's like, wow. BMW showrooms run at 1,000 lux because you walk in the door and you go, wow, these are pretty cool cars, just because the light's bright, But when you go outside on an average summer day in Europe, it's about 14,000 lux. And, so we can spend a lot of money and time trying to get the inside good enough for your brain. And out there, it already is. So, we need to think about but how does that work? Because I'm a teacher, I've got 30 kids, I've got a classroom. Half of them aren't in the classroom because I'm trying to get the density down, because there is nothing more dangerous in this world than a bunch of people in a COVID crisis all locked in the same room together. That's about as balmy as it gets. So you've got to do something about that. You could put them in a spacesuit or get someone out of the building. You certainly want to be putting masks on them. You can get them into little bubbles. So, you can be in a bubble of 4 or 6 kids. So you always have the same 4 or 6 kids. But if you do that, you better make sure they go home on the same bus together and they don't break the bubble on the transport. This is tricky stuff, but give the details to the kids, let them do the science on the solutions.
All right.
And they'll fix it.
Stephen, we're going to order 6 for this SLL team and 20 for our loyal listeners. You have to send us the bill. Let us know what it costs.
Okay, we'll send to China. Stephen, thank you so much. That's very helpful. We can keep you here for another 5 days, and but we won't be able to do that. So thank you. And that's Chris is going to announce next episode.
Yes, a few weeks ago, we had an episode on simulation and gaming that's used for professional development. But our next week's episode is on how simulation and gaming and stealth assessment can be used for student learning. One of my colleagues, Professor Tina Grotzer, will be talking about some work that she led our research team in. And Ahmad Rahimi from Florida State University will not only talk about stealth assessment, but he'll also talk about work he's doing in Iran in teacher professional development. So an exciting episode. We hope that you will be here for that.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Stephen.
I'm just gonna finish by saying, hey, you know, I'm here anytime. You know, if you want to chat more, or there's folk out
we'll
there.
bring it back. We're going to recycle this.
You know where I am.
Over a pint or 2 pints.
Even better. Even better.
Thank you.